Okay.
Today is January 14th, 2017, and we are interviewing Mitchell S. Cwiek at his home in Escondido, California. Mitchell is 94 years young, having been born on September 21st, 1922. My name is Mike Farrar, and I'll be conducting the interview. This interview is being done for the Los Angeles region of the American Red Cross, serving Greater Long Beach, Rio Hondo, and the South Bay, in conjunction with the Library of Congress and American Folklife Center. Mr. Cwiek served in the U.S. Army Air Corps, achieving the rank of Major. First and foremost, Mitch, I want to thank you for your service to our country. So tell me, what was it like as a child growing up in Terryville, Connecticut?
Well, Mike, I probably have a different childhood than most people.
Okay.
In the first place, I was born in the town of Terryville, a small town with about 5,000 population. It had two primary industrial facilities that provided income for some of the inhabitants. One was the Eagle Lock Company. It was a multi-storied building that manufactured locks. Another was a Cooper Oven thermometer company that manufactured thermometers for ovens and things like that. Shortly after I was born, my family moved to a little city nearby called Bristol. Bristol is a bigger city, and we had a home there. And my father started a small restaurant. But when I was about 5.5 years old, my mother passed away. I had no brothers and no sisters. We were entering the Depression era, and my father, who was a veteran of World War I, he had no way of making a home for me. He was suffering the after effects of being wounded in World War I. He received Purple Heart for wounds due to poison gas. And the problem we had was what to do with a little boy who was 5.5 years old, no brothers and sisters. So they started out by trying me with my mother's sister, who happened to live in Bristol. That didn't work out very good. The husband did not want an additional child in the family, so my father took me from that location and in a home with his sister. His sister lived in Hartford, Connecticut. I lived with that family for about 6 to 7 months. I was very happy there. They had 3 children, and it was a good relationship. But again, the husband of that family was not too keen on having an additional child in the family that was not his child. So the next step was to move me to the home of my father's brother back in Terryville, Connecticut. My father's brother, whose name was Frank, and his wife, Stella, had 3 children, and I fit in very nicely. Their youngest was about my age, and we got along beautifully. And then there was a daughter and a son who was older by about 6 or 7 years. So I essentially was brought up by that family. And I went to school in Terryville, grammar school and high school. I had some difficulty getting adjusted to school. My hip-hopping around looking for a place to hang my hat and be part of a family undoubtedly must have had a negative effect on my ability to concentrate and handle things that needed to be learned. So I had to repeat the second and third grade. But after that, my efforts in grammar school were very good. I had no trouble. I did very well, and that was probably a very good thing that happened, that I was held back a couple of years. I then proceeded to go to high school. Incidentally, the cousins that I was being brought up with, none of them went to high school. Mm. We were in the midst of a depression. This affected everything. I vividly remember the depression. Yeah. Money was extremely scarce. 5 cents bought you a loaf of bread. You know, you can do a little arithmetic and figure the rate of inflation to today, and it gives you a slightly different impression of the things that were going on. Movies, to go to the movies, that cost 10 cents. Didn't have 10 cents. Yet I did see a lot of movies. Why? Well, a bunch of young people and I used to get hired by the owner of the local theater. He'd pile us into his car and drive to the nearby town and let us out of the car, and we would go up and down the street putting handbills, advertisements in the doors. And for doing this, he gave us passes to go to the movies. So as a result, during this period, I got to see a variety of movies that I would otherwise not have seen. Some of them were not particularly great, but they were different. And so I had a pretty good variety of movies. The other thing was, since money was so scarce, the idea of working and making money appealed to me a great deal, and I was very eager to try and make money. I used to, when I was in the 6th grade, I used to go down to the local foundry, and I'd watch the workers making molds and castings, and I would watch what they were doing, and then I would volunteer to help with what they were doing, and they allowed me to do it. And then at the end of the week, they would give me a few cents, 35 cents, for example. Yeah. I was overjoyed. I thought that was the most wonderful thing in the world. And I couldn't wait to get home and tell the folks that I just got through getting paid 35 cents. Marvelous. And then a cousin of mine gave me a job delivering newspapers. I made about 50 cents a week on doing that. And then I decided to go to the golf course nearby and start caddying. Started out as a caddy for carrying a bag around and watching golfers' golf balls to make sure they didn't get lost. I earned 55 cents for 18 holes. And that was what they call a Class B caddy when you just began to work. After a while, you get promoted to an A-class caddy, and you made 75 cents for 18 holes. Well, that was more money than usual, but I was very happy to make that money.
Did you get to keep all that money?
Yes, it was money that I could keep. I didn't have to turn it in at all, and I used it. I'd buy myself a bar of candy or something. It was frivolous spending. I didn't buy anything significant. I did make an effort to travel to nearby towns where they paid more money for the caddies, and I caddied there in Hartford. In West Hartford, I caddied for a while at a golf course. Upper crust people played. Why would I go to Hartford? Well, my dad never did remarry, and he had a hard time finding a job during the Depression. I recall walking around with him in Hartford, stopping at different businesses, and he would go in and ask about a job. I would wait for him outside. I can remember one day he came out from a hotel that he went to, very, very pleased and happy. He said, "I've got a job." I said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "I've got a job in this restaurant in the hotel, washing dishes." I said, "Gee, that's great." But that's how he started. And he gradually went from there to a short order cook. And he was happy that he was able to make a few pennies. He rented a place there. But that was his life. I didn't live with him. I visited him frequently. As part of the way of getting along, he lived for a while in a soldier's home in a place called New Roten in the southern part of Connecticut. It was a very well-established, well-built, well-run place for veterans. And I remember spending the summer down there with him. I stayed with a couple of elderly ladies, sort of boarding there while I was visiting with him. So it was kind of exciting to be down there with him. And for entertainment, we would go down to the railroad station and wait for the train to come by. There would be a train that came by on its way to New York. It didn't stop there, but it came through the station at about 60 miles an hour, and that was pretty, that was a thrill to see that train come zapping through there. The other thing that I recall that my youth is that I was crazy about airplanes. I loved airplanes. Every time I saw a plane and it was landing at the local airport, which was about 5 miles away, I would try to get to that airport just so I could see the airplane, get close to it. I was very much involved in my own mind, at least, with military activities. My dad used to tell me stories about the war. They were not happy stories, they were grim stories. He fought in the trenches.
That was tough.
He was a member of the 26th Division, which was known as the WWII, or the Yankee Division. And that division fought in just about every big land battle in France.
Did your dad have problems after he came back?
Yes, he had problems. He had problems with his health. I think I'm sure he suffered from PTSD, but at that time, nobody knew about PTSD. As a matter of fact, PTSD has only recently been accepted as a legitimate wartime repercussion. And so, being crazy about flying and airplanes, I used to hang out at the local airport in Hartford. So when I go to see my dad, while he was at work, I'd get on my bicycle and I would ride down to the local airport. I'd spend all day at the airport. And one of the things that was there was a Connecticut National Guard hangar. Based there was an organization known as the 118th Observation Squadron. They had two basic type of planes, the Douglas O-46 and the North American O-47. The O-46 was a fixed landing gear, high wing aircraft, three-place, and the North American O-47 was a three-place aircraft that had retractable landing gear, low wing, more modern, and the center position was the aerial photographer, and it had a little pregnant belly, so the photographer could lower himself in the body of the aircraft, and he could look on each side, outside, to see where he was, and his camera, of course, was right in front of him. And I used to hang out there and try like everything I could to sort of get myself in good graces with the members of the squadron. And they kind of adopted me. I was a mascot. They were my mentors. To this day, I remember the names of some of them. Paul Merrill, who was a Mason, Master Sergeant. Another Master Sergeant was Joe Dully. He was a squadron aerial photographer. And they took me under their wing, so to speak. So I would spend a lot of time there. So when I would come back to school, when school started in September, my friends and all would say, well, what did you do this summer? I said, I was at the airport. I was doing things there. Merrill, for example, let me get in the cockpit once while he went out to swing the compass. Swinging the compass meant it took the plane out to a place where there was a compass rose on the concrete with the north, south, east, west marked, and he would position the aircraft so it pointed in a specific direction, run the engine up, and then he would take a reading on the compasses to see how much variation occurred in the compass due to the engine being run. And he would mark this variation down on a little card that appeared in the cockpit. So when the pilot was navigating, he had to take into account two things. One was the variation, and the other was the deviation. One was due to magnetic forces, due to the way the Earth was organized by the Creator, and the other was a deviation or variation created by the engines operating. So that was quite a thrill. Be sitting in a military airplane while this was going on.
How old were you?
Oh, I was probably about 14, 15. It was a big thrill. And the only thing I used to worry about was I wanted to be a flyer, but I remember getting car sick once in the car, and I was worried that I might get airsick. So one day my dad took me to the airport, and he paid for me to go up in a Piper Cub on a flight. And I took my box camera with me. We went up and flew up over the city of Hartford and back and landed at Brainerd Field. And I took pictures. There was the first aerial photographs that I took in my whole life. They came out beautifully.
Mitch, where did you get your first camera?
What?
When did you get your first camera?
Oh, I must have been just about 14 years old.
Okay.
It was, it was just a box camera.
Yeah.
But my friend Joe Dully, the aerial photographer from the squadron, he saw I was interested in photography also. So he bought me a 35 millimeter Argus camera. It was the first camera I owned that had an anastigmatic lens. I was now making pictures that were really good, and I learned to develop them myself and print them myself. And I used to have a little lab up in the attic in my house. There was no running water up there, but I used to carry the water up there in gallon jugs. I would mix my chemicals. I would black out all the windows, and I would develop all my pictures, and then I would print them. And I got good quality pictures to the point where I was beginning to start a business. People were giving me their film to develop and print because I was producing far better quality pictures than they were getting from the local drugstore where they used to take their film. So anyhow, my dad took me to the airport and paid for me to go up to the Piper Cub to see if I'd get airsick. Well, I didn't. I was overjoyed. I came back down and I was overjoyed that I didn't get airsick. I was so glad that he did this. He allowed me to do this.
Okay, let's hold that thought for a minute.
Yeah. 18th Observation Squadron. It was a wonderful association. I was very, very privileged to be allowed to work with those guys. And all the guys I went to school with were just flabbergasted. And we, come home after vacation, and well, what did you do over vacation? Well, I went down the farm and I did this and that. What did you do? Well, I went on maneuvers with the National Guard. You what?
Yeah.
I did. I went on maneuvers.
And that was at what, 16?
I was about, I don't know what the hell age I was, but it was 1940, early 1941, I think. It was just before Pearl Harbor.
Mm.
Well, I'll tell all that as soon as we get started here again.
Yeah.
Just let me know when to start.
Okay, well, we're starting right now.
Okay. In mid-1941, a number of National Guard organizations had to participate in joint maneuvers with the regular U.S. Army, and the 118th Observation Squadron that I used to hang out with was assigned to participate at a location near the Canadian border, at a place called Malone, New York. And they wanted to know, they being the members of the squadron, if I would like to go with them and earn a few bucks working as a KP. That stands for kitchen police, to work in the kitchen during the maneuvers, and that way the men in the squadron would have more time to participate in the regular activities of the maneuver. They wouldn't have to do kitchen work.
Right.
So I said, I'd love to do that. So I got a typhoid shot to be one of the boys, and hurt like hell. And then off I went. This was during the summer, and I'm up there in Malone, New York, getting up sleeping in a tent, cold as hell at night, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and work preparing breakfast for the troops, and what other activities they wanted me to perform. And then about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd get a couple hours off, and they'd let me do what I wanted to do. I always took my camera and I went out taking pictures of the airplanes doing various jobs. An interesting and comical episode took place. I don't mind telling now because I'm safe. But one of the jobs they had me doing was, it was a kind of a dark tent. And in this tent was a table, and on this table was a whole bunch of 5 or 10 pound sacks of sugar. And the head cook, who by the way was called Pete the Greek. During normal activities, Pete the Greek ran a little mobile restaurant. He used to drive this little restaurant around and sell snacks to people in different jobs. That was his normal job. But he was a member of the National Guard, so when maneuvers time came, he had to go with the squadron, and he worked as the squadron cook. And one of the things about Pete the Greek was he had a most unusual vocabulary that I had never heard before. It was outright atrocious. So and he had a short temper, so I was very careful not to antagonize him in any way. I did what I had to do, and did it promptly and all that stuff. So one of the jobs he had me to, he says, here's a whole bunch of 5-pound bags of sugar. He said, I want you to empty these bags into this barrel. We want this barrel full of sugar. I said, okay. And it's kind of dark there, so I'm working away, putting this sugar into the barrel. And I'm about halfway through the job. I happened to take a close look at one of those bags that I emptied. And it had a 4-letter word spelling S-A-L-T. I said, now what am I going to do? I've got a bunch of bags of salt mixed in with sugar in this barrel. There's no way in the world I can get that salt out of there. And if I tell Pete the Greek what happened, he'll kill me. So I chose to say nothing. Nothing. All I did was hid those salt bags and finished the job, and that was the end of it. But the days that followed, I used to shudder when the troops would come by with their cups of coffee, you know, and they would look at the coffee and say, whoa. They were suspicious that the authorities were placing a thing called saltpeter into their drink to keep their male hormones under control when they went into town for leave. And of course, I said absolutely nothing because I didn't want to get killed. I didn't say anything to anybody about that until a couple of years later.
And they never noticed?
Well, they didn't know what had happened. They knew there was some salt, somehow or other the salt got into there, but they didn't know how it happened. And they didn't put 2 and 2 together. And so I kind of escaped execution. But that was part of my experience that summer. So when I came back to school that fall for my senior year, my buddy said, well, what did you do this summer? I said, well, I went on maneuvers with the National Guard. You what? And I, well, yeah, I said, I told them what happened. And they were flabbergasted. And I wanted to join, as soon as Pearl Harbor occurred, I wanted to join the Army right then and there. And all my mentors in the squadron said, no, 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 no. You finish high school. This war is going to last long enough for you to get into it. Just don't jump the gun.
Mitch, do you remember what you were doing on that Sunday that Pearl Harbor
Yes, I do. I was working in the drugstore. I had a job in the local drugstore. That was one of the best jobs I had. I went in one day to fill a prescription for my uncle, and the owner of the store came up to me and he said, how would you like a job? And I said, yeah, I'd love it. He said, well, report on such and such a date. You're going to work here as a salesperson. First of all, we'll start you off behind the soda counter. I operated the soda fountain and made sundaes, banana splits, and that kind of stuff. And every day I was permitted to make myself one special sundae or banana split. I think I made $14 a week. And it was the best job I had. And I was accepted in the group there in the drugstore as a member of the family. He had a brother working there and longtime friends. And at Christmas time, they'd have a party at the owner's house and that kind of thing. So I became kind of a member of the family. It was a really nice job. It was the only drugstore in town, and it was a prestigious job. I felt honored to be given that job. Finally, the time came for me to join the Army. I graduated in 1942, and I said, okay, here I am. I've finished my high school. I'm going to now join the Army. So I went down to Hartford, signed up, and they said, okay, you have to take a physical examination. So I took the exam, and I passed with flying colors, except I was underweight, too skinny. They said, well, you're underweight, I forget how many pounds it was. 12 pounds or something. And he said, go back home and eat a lot of bananas and that kind of stuff and get yourself built up. Come back and take the exam again, because all the other things you did are good. Your written exams were perfect. Everything was wonderful. So you need to put some weight on. I said, okay. So I went home and I ate bananas and I did everything I could to put on weight, and I'd weigh myself. Still short. I'll be getting desperate. So I'm working in the drugstore, and so I go in there and they've got a scale, and I weighed the empty glass, then I filled it with water, and I weighed it again, a little bit of arithmetic, so I figured out the weight of the water itself in this glass, and I figured I had to drink 8 glasses of water in order to make up the shortage of weight. So on the day that I decided to go to get examined again, I drank all this damn water, and I felt like I was drowning. But I reported, and I said, this is it, I'll make it. So they ran me through the mill again, and the sergeant came out, and he said, well, you've passed it again, but you're still short a couple of pounds. Would you go out in the hall and drink some water and make it up? I didn't say a word. I went out and made believe I was drinking water. I couldn't drink another drop. And the sergeant felt sorry. He said, well, we'll skip this couple pound business. He said, you go ahead. We're going to pass you. Oh, thank goodness. I was drowning. Actually, I was drowning. I was ingesting so much water. So I entered the service. I took the oath and got in the train, and off we went. And my father, who was working in a restaurant nearby at the time, came to the railroad platform with his apron on and all to see me off. And there's a whole bunch of young people on the train going to their first station of report was Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And I remember my dad saying goodbye to me, and he was crying because, you know, he had memories.
Did he talk to you about that at all before you left?
What?
About the military? Did your dad?
Well, yeah, he was in World War I, and he just talked to me about it all the time. And so I became enthusiastic about a military position. And my dad was very proud of being a soldier. He was a private first class, and when we used to walk around Hartford he was looking for a job, and he'd see some of these people who were unemployed wearing bits and pieces of military clothing. He would get very angry.
Yeah.
He said, this uniform is a very special thing. It should not be worn as a cast-off thing. You know. So that's one thing he instilled in me, was a feeling of respect for the uniform. But he remembered what it was like to be in the military, and he had a rough time, and so he was kind of sad when he saw me departing, see.
Yeah.
But we went up to Fort Devens and boot camp, so to speak, and that's when I changed the pronunciation of my name. Every morning at roll call, the sergeant would start calling the rolls. Smith, Jones, Murphy, Albert, and then there'd be a long pause. And I knew that's when he came to my name. He couldn't figure out how the hell to pronounce it. And that happened every morning. And I said, well, I got to do something about that. I'm going to change the pronunciation of this name. So it may be a little different and unusual, but it's going to be remembered. So I thought about it, and I said, I think I'll change it to Cwiek. Now, the pronunciation, as previously established by my family, was not correct either. And the main reason for that is in Polish, a W is pronounced as a V. And so, in Polish, the name is pronounced Cwiek. It's a very difficult pronunciation for anyone who speaks English as their primary language. So I changed it to Cwiek, and I figured, well, C, a hard C like in the word cat, the W, pronounce it as a W, I, pronounce it as an I, E is silent, which is normal in some words, and then the K, no problem. And it worked. It worked. From then on, when roll call came, I didn't have a damn bit of problem. And it's been that way for the rest of my life.
Do you remember who your drill sergeant was?
Remember what?
The drill sergeant's name?
No, no, I sure don't. I don't remember. I do remember participating in a huge parade while I was there. The Queen of the Netherlands came to visit, Queen Wilhelmina, and we had this big parade for her. And I remember standing out for an hour and a half waiting for the powers that be to get things organized and start the march. We must have been a pretty sad sight because none of us really had much training in drill or marching and that kind of thing. But we didn't spend too much time there because soon enough we got orders to ship out. I had to head for my real boot camp training, which was going to be Miami Beach, Florida. So here I am. I've never been out of the state of Connecticut. I got on a train and we're heading south. So it was a new experience for me to travel through these states and see what the terrain looked like, what the homes looked like. It was quite an experience. And I got to Miami Beach in the middle of summer. It was July, and it was hot and humid. I mean, it was really an experience to get out of that air-conditioned bus and into a non-air-conditioned bus. Oh my gosh, what a terrible experience that was. But all the marching and the boot camp and while in Miami Beach was done in the streets of Miami Beach. There was no parade ground to speak. What little parade ground was the golf course. But all the other marching and stuff was in the streets. I remember one day, it was a very hot and dry day, and the drill sergeant stopped this squad in front of a tavern and said, "Okay, boys, go in, we're going to all have a beer." And I remember how wonderful that beer tasted. It was cold, and it just was absolutely wonderful. But we finished the basic training, and then off I went in a train for Santa Ana, California. And that was going to be one long trip.
Yep.
And it was going to be in a train pulled by a steam engine, burning coal. So by the time we got to Santa Ana, we were pretty filthy. And so that was the next stop, so to speak, Santa Ana. And Santa Ana was what we called pre-flight. There they gave us a bunch of exams to see if we qualified to go into training for pilots. Or if we couldn't qualify for pilot, then we might be assigned as a navigator or bombardier. Well, I passed all the tests, and I qualified for pilot training. I was tickled to death. And after X number of weeks, I think it was 13 weeks or so, I was shipped out to go to what was called a primary flight training, which was in Arizona. One interesting experience that I had in Santa Ana was I met a young man on the train going from Miami Beach to Florida, who was being assigned as a merchant marine. And he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, Santa Ana, California." He says, "Well, I know a girl in Santa Ana. I'll give you her name and telephone number. You look her up. She might be a nice date." Well, I said, great, thank you very much. So when I got to Santa Ana, I wrote her a letter, and she was intrigued by the situation of my getting her name, and she corresponded with me. And after 13 weeks, we were free to go on pass into town. And so I had a date with her. And I was so excited. It was the first big date that I ever had in my life. And she was going to pick me up in a car. Holy mackerel. I mean, that was a big deal. And about dusk, I come dashing out of the barracks, running for the bus stop, and I ran across a piece of grass that had just been planted, and they had it enclosed with a rope and stakes, and I tripped over this rope, fell down on this grass, and just ripped the trousers. So I went back in and I begged a buddy of mine to loan me his trousers, which he did. They were a little big for me, but it's all right. I then got on a bus and went to the appointed meeting place for the date. That was my first date. Anyhow, it was an interesting experience, and I kept in touch with this young lady even after I went overseas. And I thought I was serious about her. It just happened that when I ceased to correspond with her, why, she ended up getting married to another guy. Okay. But that was an experience in what we called pre-flight, and after pre-flight.
Well, I'm sorry, Mitch. What was involved with pre-flight training?
Pre-flight, we had some ground. It's called ground courses. We studied meteorology, a little bit of meteorology, aerodynamics, a little bit of that, and basically things that were associated with flying. There wasn't much to it, but it was called pre-flight. The majority of it was marching, learning close order drill, and we marched with a rifle, which is kind of ridiculous because we were being trained to fly airplanes, see. But eventually we were through with that, and they shipped me to my next station, which was going to be called primary flight training. That's the first episode of learning to fly an airplane. And there they had, this was at Thunderbird Field near Glendale, Arizona. And the airplane that we were going to be training in was a biplane, 2 wings, single engine, made by, I think, Stearman or Boeing. It's called I think PT-13. Very small airplane, 2-place, instructor and student. And that was very interesting. I enjoyed that very much. They train you to do such things as handle emergencies. You'd be flying along, and the instructor would cut the throttle and shut the engine off, and he said, "Okay, emergency." And your job was to pick out a likely field that you could make a halfway safe landing with a dead engine. And so you looked around, and finally you'd spot something, and you maneuvered your airplane. It being a light airplane, it didn't lose altitude too rapidly, but you were in effect a glider during that period, looking for this field. And so you finally pick one out, and you start coming in to land the airplane. And the instructor, he would wait until you're almost on the ground where he'd push the throttle forward, start the engine up again. So, okay, you did okay there, and go on to the next little exercise. But that was, I eventually got to the point where the instructor said, okay, you can take it up by yourself, which is known as a solo flight, a very big event in the life of a student pilot. So I got in the airplane and pushed that throttle forward, and soon I was in the air, and I was so thrilled. I tell you, and all I had to do is fly a circle around the airfield, come back and land. That's all I had to do. But I was so thrilled at being up in that airplane by myself that I yelled as loud as I could. I'll bet you they probably heard me on the ground over the noise of the engine. I was just so enthusiastic about it. Anyhow, from then on it was more training, and eventually I got transferred to the next step, which was called basic training. There I went to a place called Marana, Arizona, which is down not far from Tucson. And there we flew a heavier airplane, single engine, fixed landing gear, and we learned such things as navigation and night flying. I remember the first night flight was a navigation flight, kind of scary. They told us to be alert to the flames coming out of the exhaust because some people thought the engine was on fire, but it wasn't. It's just the flame coming out of the exhaust. So those little warnings helped, and the cross-country flight from Marana to Phoenix and back was uneventful, but that was a big thrill too, that I was able to navigate that plane at night and safely land it. That was a real morale booster. I finished basic training in that airplane. By the way, it was called the Vultee BT-13.
Okay.
And we used to call it the Vultee vibrator. It vibrated like crazy. And one of the things you had to learn in that plane is how to stall the plane and how to pull it out of a stall. A stall is a dangerous thing to have happen. If you have enough altitude, you can recover and it's no harm. But if you run into a stall and you're too low, you could get killed. And so it was very important that you learned what the airplane felt like when it was beginning to stall and what you had to do in order to correct the situation, and quickly. So that was one of the things they tested you on as you were passing through the training at what's called basic flying school. Eventually, you received what's called a check flight, a final check flight. Very important. And I remember the instructor taking me up and right over a small mountain we called Picacho Peak. It was looked like a small volcano 150 years ago, and it still stood there with a little, looked like a, like a cone. And we're right over this thing, and he says, "Okay, put it in a stall and spin, and I'll tell you when to pull it out." So I looked down, and the damn thing is under. I said, "You want me to stall this thing right here?" He says, "Yes." So I said, "Okay." So I raised the nose until the airplane stalled and went into a spin. And he said, "Okay, pull it out." Well, to pull a thing out of a stall, what you had to do is cross controls and pop the stick forward real hard as part of the procedure. And so I did that with such speed and efficiency that he had a loose seatbelt back there, and I remember him banging his head on the canopy. But anyhow, the upshot is I passed that test, and I was very pleased, very happy, because the next step was the final school, which was called Advanced Flying School, and that was up near Chandler, Arizona, not far from Phoenix, at a place called Williams Field. And Williams Field had twin engines planes, the 18-9 made by Curtiss. It was a very peculiar airplane, had a relatively small wing, which meant it had a high wing loading, and when it came in for a landing, it came in very steep. So steep, in fact, that you could look at the runway through the top of the canopy instead of the front. That's how steep it was. So it was quite an experience to learn how to fly that thing. Of course, you had two engines, and there you had a new problem. What do you do when one engine fails, particularly when you're taking off, which is an extremely dangerous situation. You've got to work very fast to do the correct thing and save your life, because if you don't work fast, you're going to have trouble. You're going to die. So twin engines was kind of a special training. You know, you had to learn how to handle the airplane when you had trouble, and it was a little different than a single engine. Single engine, if your engine quit, all you had to do is look for a place to make an emergency landing. With a twin engine plane, if one engine quit, you tried to save the plane. You feathered the propeller on the dead engine. Feathering the propeller means you turn the propeller so that it was streamlined to the wind and didn't create a drag. If you left the propeller in its normal position, it acted as a brake, and it tended to make recovery very difficult. So you had to do, say, 1, 2, 3 real fast to save the plane and fly the plane on one engine back to a safe landing. So twin engine was, a big thing.
What was the plane called?
Sir?
What was the twin engine plane called?
Well, I was trying to think, it was 89.
89.
Yeah, Curtis. I think it probably had a nickname, but I don't remember what the nickname was.
Okay.
May have been Pony or something like that.
Oh, okay.
And the one other thing we learned to fly the AT-6, which was a single-engine advanced trainer. We used that to practice gunnery. The first time we got a chance to practice gunnery with a single 30 caliber machine gun in the wing, and we went to a place called Ajo, Arizona, to dive down at a target and fire the machine gun. It didn't take much to do that. The other airplane we learned to fly while we were there was a Lockheed Lightning P-22. Really, it was a emasculated, we called it, emasculated Lightning. P-38 Lightning was a very sophisticated twin-engine fighter that was designed by a gentleman named Johnson, Kelly Johnson, who later, in the later years, became famous as the designer of the SR-71, which was the Blackbird, an airplane so fast that the Russians and the other enemies never were able to shoot it down. It flew at about Mach 3, cruising. So it was not only fast, but it flew at extremely high altitudes. It was used for reconnaissance. The P-38, a twin-engine fighter, designed also by Kelly, was a fighter plane that was used for many other purposes as well. It could be used for dive bombing, for ground attack, and for photography. It had a center section right in front of the pilot, so it was strictly a one-man airplane, and you had these two engines, one on each side. They were inline, that is, liquid-cooled engines made by Allison, and it was a pretty fast airplane. And it was not probably as maneuverable as a single-engine fighter like the Mustang, but it had other attributes which made it a pretty damn fine airplane. It certainly was a joy to fly. We called it the Cadillac of all airplanes. It was just wonderful to fly. But it being twin engines, you had to be concerned about how to handle it when one engine quit. Because when that thing quit, especially on takeoff, you really had to work fast and never turn the airplane into the dead engine for fear of going into a spin and hitting the ground. So that was my advanced flying, and eventually graduated, got second lieutenant bars, silver wings, and assignment to my next base, which happened to be a place called La Junta, Colorado. La Junta, L-A-J-U-N-T-A, I think. And I was going there for what purpose? To learn to fly the B-25. The B-25, also known as the Mitchell bomber, was famous for its use in the attack on Japan by Jimmy Doolittle
Yeah.
and his troops early in the war when our morale was low and we were hurting. Roosevelt authorized an attack from an aircraft carrier by B-25, something never done before. The B-25 was not designed to fly off of an aircraft carrier. But Jimmy Doolittle, who was a famous flyer during that period, flying racing aircraft, and so he was very famous, and also a very good pilot. And so he was charged with the task of training this group of men to take off a B-25 in an extremely short period, because they were training to take off from an aircraft carrier. Unheard of. Normally you expect a B-25 needs a long runway, pick up speed and take off. Well, now, there's one thing you have to keep in mind about airplanes and aerodynamics is that every airplane has what is known as a critical stalling speed, or also called flying speed. And at a certain speed, the airplane becomes airborne. It is capable of lifting the whole weight of the airplane and actually fly. So the trick is, when you're taking an airplane off, is you run down the runway until the speed of the airplane reaches that speed at which it is necessary to provide airborne, for the airplane to be airborne. So the takeoff speed, the B-25, was about 110 miles an hour, something like that. I could be off by some percentage there. So their job was, how do we train these people to take this medium bomber, the B-25, and take off from an aircraft carrier? The plan was to sail the aircraft carrier, which was the Hornet, by the way, and get as close as possible to the Japanese islands. It would permit the aircraft to reach their designated targets, drop their bombs, and then make a safe escape towards China, where they were going to either crash, bail out, or make landings at specified airfields. Well, unfortunately, what happened was that, let me say this. One of the things you have to keep in mind when you're taking an aircraft off of an aircraft carrier is, in order to get the correct speed, the airspeed, that's the speed of the wind, a slipstream, passing over the wings. That's the speed, not the actual speed of the aircraft over the ground. So if you're taking off against the wind, and you always take off against the wind, let's say you had a wind of 30 miles an hour, and your takeoff speed is, say, 180, well, obviously you don't have to use too much arithmetic to figure out that your actual speed on the runway is going to be less than you need in order to become airborne, because you've got a headwind. The headwind is necessary. So one of the things they were keeping in mind was, once they get on this aircraft carrier, is they're going to, first of all, the captain of the ship is going to sail the ship against the wind. So whatever the wind is, that wind will act as a benefit to the aircraft trying to become airborne. So if you got a 30-knot wind, you don't need that extra 30 knots on the deck of the ship. You'll need less actual distance. So that was the trick. And eventually the ship was approaching Japan, and a Japanese fishing vessel was spotted. And the captain of the ship said, "Uh-oh, we have been spotted, and the chances are this fishing vessel is going to alert the Japanese that we're on the way, therefore we're going to launch immediately." And so they launched the attack much sooner than they had planned, which meant that they had less gasoline after it reached the target than they would normally have made. So they reached the target successfully, and they bombed it successfully. It was a fantastic morale booster to the country. I can remember today getting the headlines of Jimmy Doolittle bombs Japan. Wow! I mean, we're finally getting back to those bastards, you know. And so it was a world-shaking event, so to speak. Jimmy Doolittle got the Congressional Medal of Honor, I think, promoted, and all the guys that flew in that particular attack got promotions. And I might add that a couple of those guys that were on that mission ended up later on flying in Europe, and I ran into a couple of them in prison camp. They were shot down over enemy territory in the European theater of operations. And so that was an interesting episode. The B-25 was a fantastic airplane. It was built by North American, and it was designed for as a medium bomber, but it was used for a lot of other things like photography and so on.
What kind of armament did it have?
The B-25 had a top turret with a powered turret with two 50 caliber machine guns. It had a tail gunner and a couple of waist gunners. The waist gunners were located in back of the bomb bay, to the rear of the bomb bay. And it carried, I don't know, maybe 3,000 to 4,000 pounds of bombs. It didn't carry a lot of heavy bomb load, but it was reasonably fast in its day, and so it was useful in many theaters of operations. It was nicknamed the Mitchell bomber after a gentleman who was famous in the United States Air Force as a proponent of air power. General Mitchell, by the way, was court-martialed for his outspokenness in arguing the point that the Air Force should spend time and effort developing its bombing capability. He was arguing that the Navy's reliance on battleships was a disaster, and that they were vulnerable to attack from the air. And to prove his point, he scheduled an exercise in which some old battleships that were picked up from Germany were set upon by some bombers, and they were pretty ancient bombers, not very sophisticated bombers, but they were hit by reasonably sized bombs, and they sunk them. And the Navy was upset. I mean, they were really pissed off that they thought the battleship was supreme, and nobody was going to sink a battleship.
Right.
Well, it turned out different, and the Japanese proved that at Pearl Harbor. They sank a whole bunch of battleships. And it turned out that after Pearl Harbor, the key ship was not the battleship, but the aircraft carrier. Unfortunately, we had some aircraft carriers that were out of port at the time, so we had some aircraft carriers that were saved from the Pearl Harbor disaster.
Yeah.
So anyhow, the upshot is B-20. Let me get back up a little bit. After I finished my advanced training, I was given a leave of absence, my first leave of absence. So I came home, visited relatives, my father, and I was very happy to be there. And I remember taking my dad out for lunch and drinks, and I made him wear his ribbons from World War I. I wanted him to do that because I felt you should be proud of these things. And he was overjoyed that I was home, and and could spend some time with him. And then I reported to my first duty station, was at Columbia, South Carolina, for more B-25 training. Now I was training for an overseas assignment, probably the Pacific, because that's where a lot of the B-25s were going. And I got to my station at Columbia Army Air Base, and a few days after I got there, I received a telegram. The telegram arrived on my 21st birthday. It told me that my father had died. He died of a stroke, and so now I was really all alone. I had no brothers, no sisters, no mother, no father. I was alone. And it was a strange feeling, you know. But I felt like, okay, I got to make my place in the world or whatever on the basis of my own efforts. And first thing I had to do was get an emergency leave. I could travel back up to Connecticut and arrange for the proper funeral for my dad, a military funeral. I arranged that with a local air base, and they sent some soldiers with proper equipment and so on to perform a military funeral. And then after that, of course, I had to come back to Columbia Army Air Base, continue my training in preparation for, I had a crew, I had a 5-man crew, counting myself, and we practiced navigation, formation flying. We dropped a bomb, also flew a B-25H, or G, it was a G model, which was equipped with a 75-millimeter cannon. I mean, that's a big gun. The shell for that was about this, you know, about a foot long and, well, 75 millimeter in diameter, in cross section. And that was designed for ship attack. Later they dispensed with that because they felt it was more effective to carry a bunch of high velocity aerial rockets. Because you launch the rocket and you could launch more than one. You could carry, say, 12 rockets, and you had 12 shots. With a 75 millimeter cannon, your bombardier, no longer a bombardier, he was a cannon loader. He would load the 75 millimeter cannon, and the pilot would then fly that plane towards this target, which was usually a ship, fire the weapon, and then off he'd go, because you only get one shot before he could get another round off.
Now, could you feel the movement in the plane when you fired that cannon?
Yeah, you could feel it.
Yeah.
You could feel it. It was a sort of an immediate kind of a jolt. It had a hell of a recoil. Yeah, you could feel it. And also, when we dropped our bomb, 500-pound bomb, we were told to fly low enough so that when the bomb exploded, you felt it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, you could feel a concussion of the plane. But let me tell you something that happened at Columbia Army Air Base. First of all, I learned how to fly instruments. I passed the instrument check. I had to fly under the hood, with a hood over my head, about 200 miles away from my airfield. I had to fly that thing by instruments to my airfield and position the airplane so I was coming in for a landing on the runway, all on instruments. And just at the last moment, the instructor would say, okay, take a look. And you'd raise the hood, and you'd look out there, and there was the runway, assuming you did everything right. So I was kind of thrilled and proud to I earned what was called a white card. That's an instrument card, which is your proof that you qualified as an instrument pilot. People that flew single-engine airplanes didn't go through that kind of training.
Were there ever any mishaps where you were there?
Yes, well, certainly there were mishaps. There are always mishaps. I didn't have one, frankly. When I did my thing, and I got to where I thought I was in the right place to land, the instructor says, "Okay, raise the hood," and I raised the hood, and there was a damn runway in front of me. I was very thrilled. But here's the funny thing that happened. And to this day, I don't understand how it happened or even why it happened. But it certainly changed the course of my life, my Air Force career, everything. I missed a meeting. The head commander, called a meeting of all pilots one day that were training at that time. And for some reason or other, I did not get the word. I was not aware of the fact that there was this important meeting, so I didn't go. I had no excuse, except that I didn't know. So lo and behold, after the meeting, I got called on the carpet. And the commander says, "Where were you? How come you didn't attend the meeting?" And I wondered, what the hell should I say? Should I tell him I didn't know there was a meeting? That would be kind of a silly-ass answer. So I simply said, "No excuse, sir," which is one of the things you do in the military when you get caught with your shirt tails hanging out. And they say, "Why did you do such a thing?" What? Well, no excuse. In other words, you don't quibble and argue with powers that be. You just simply lay your hands like this and you say, "I'm available for your penalty, punishment. What can I do?" Well, he didn't do anything. He said, "Okay, that's all, dismissed." Well, 2 weeks later, I had orders to move from Columbia Army Air Base to Drew Field near Tampa, Florida, to become part of a B-17 crew. B-17 is a 4-engine heavy bomber made by Boeing. So I got bumped out of B-25s into B-17s. I went there to be a co-pilot. That was my punishment. You know, you might say, "Well, why didn't you, argue about it now?" I just bit my lip and I went, joined this group of people, and it was a nice group of people. The navigator became a very close friend of mine. His name was Don Strebe. He was from Washington, Everett, Washington. The pilot, his name is Bogar. I never got along with him, but none of the other crew members did either. A footnote is that Bogar was responsible for a mid-air collision later in the war that killed all the crew of 2 planes. Now,
Including himself?
Huh?
Including himself?
Including himself.
Yeah.
At the time of the accident, they were coming back from a mission, and they had an accident in the air where 2 planes came too close together and the propellers chewed each other up and exploded and burned and crashed. And they were too low to bail out. Nobody bailed out. So everybody got killed. Now where the hell was I? How come I wasn't on that plane? The reason was I was in the hospital recovering from food poisoning. Now, why do I bring this up? Because it's another one of these little incidents that takes place in a person's life that changes the course of your whole life.
Yeah.
And you don't know why did it happen. Because if it hadn't happened, you would have gone this way. I would have been going to the Pacific, flying B-25s. No, I didn't go to the Pacific. I went to the European theater. And how come was I in the hospital with food poisoning? How the hell did that happen? Well, it just so happened that one day, it was Easter Sunday, I was walking around in a nearby town called Lucera, L-U-C-E-R-A, with nothing to do, and that was what we did. if there was no mission, no bombing mission, you were free to do whatever you wanted. You could go to town, you could, there wasn't much you could do. The town was crummy. So I decided to take a walk in this little town of Lucera. And while I'm in this town, I spotted a soldier with a strange uniform. And I said, well, I wonder who that is and what's that uniform? So I looked closely, and he had his hat, and he had a special eagle on his hat. And I recognized that as the Polish eagle. So I spoke to him in Polish. I could speak that language because my parents were Polish.
Right.
They were immigrants from Poland. And I learned to speak the language because that's what they spoke at home. Of course, once I got to school and got out of the house, I learned English very quickly. I assimilated very rapidly, as opposed to some people today. They speak Spanish fluently, but they also speak English poorly because they continue to use Spanish as their primary language and don't take the effort to learn English correctly. But I learned to speak Polish pretty damn well. So when I approached this soldier in Lucera and I said, well, good morning, what's going on? Is there a camp of some kind around here with Polish troops? And he says, oh yes, there is. Let me take you to my commander. I want to introduce you to him. I said, okay. I didn't have anything else to do. So I followed him to this encampment, and they happened to have a big party going on outside. It was Easter Sunday, so they had huge tables loaded with food and drinks, having a big party. And the lieutenant, who was this man's commander, came out, and the soldier said, okay, this gentleman can speak Polish. I thought I'd bring him here and have him meet you. And this lieutenant was very helpful, very pleasant, and invited me to sit down and have a meal with them, and drinks and so on. And there began a big friendship. Every time I had no mission to fly, instead of just roaming around, I would go to his encampment and visit with him. And the kind of organization he had was a transportation company. So their job was to transport food and supplies to the Poles in the front lines. Now, the Poles had a pretty good-sized group of soldiers operating in Italy. It was known as the Second Corps under General Władysław Anders. That was all part of the 8th Army. But they were Poles, and you say, well, how did they get to Italy? Well, they were a bunch of soldiers that were captured by the Russians, and through the interference of politicians in England and so on, they finally got the Russians to release a large number of these troops. They ended up going to the Middle East, and they fought in the Middle East, and they ended up in Italy, fighting in Italy. And they did a marvelous job in the capture of a place called Monte Cassino. It was a very dangerous place that was occupied by the Germans. It prevented the Allies from advancing up the peninsula of Italy, and they bombed it to pieces with heavy bombers and so on, and left nothing but rubble. But all it did was the rubble provided excellent places for the Germans to hide, and it made it even more difficult to capture the damn place. But the upshot is that the Poles eventually succeeded in capturing, and in their historical documents, that was a proud moment for them. They captured a very important target, and they were extremely proud of it. So I was there during all that happening, and for example, the Poles took me to a Polish USO show once. They took me down to another camp to visit. They took me up to a field hospital up north, close to the front lines, to meet some nurses and so on, to be friends with them. And so it was a very amicable relationship. And during one of those visits up at the field hospital, I happened to eat some Canadian bacon that was in a can, and it was tainted. And I caught food poisoning. I was in absolute agony. And the lieutenant drove me down the mountain as fast as he could. If I hadn't been sick, I would have probably had a conniption fit just watching him come down that mountain. But he finally got me back to my base, and the doctor, my doctor, the American doctor, came and checked me out, and he said, well, okay, you've got food poisoning, off to the hospital you go. So I don't know how many days I was in the hospital, but I was out of it. I was unconscious for a period of time. At that time, we didn't have particularly powerful antibiotics. I think the only biotic we had at that time was, what's it called? What the hell was that antibiotic? Anyhow, it was sure as hell wasn't penicillin. It was an earlier version of something. And so I'm in this hospital when this accident took place. And half of my crew, 5 men of my crew, original crew, got killed in that thing. My good friend, Donald Strebe, got killed. A radio man, Klein, got killed. Waist gunner, Taylor. Tail gunner, Hudson, got killed. And I was extremely sad at this news. And my Polish friend was sad too, because I used to bring my navigator to the Polish camp frequently, and to participate in, comradeship, happy time, okay? Oh, when he got killed, my Polish friend was very sad too. But the upshot was, I was in the hospital, and the question that comes to my mind is, if I hadn't been in the hospital, if I hadn't known these Polish troops, I would have possibly been on that airplane, because I was part of the crew. Now, why wasn't the crew a complete crew? Well, every now and then people can't fly because they have a cold or something. So your crews are broken up. So every day for the following mission, you had to check the bulletin board to see who you were flying with for the next day. So it just so happened that on that day, only 5 members of my original crew were on that airplane. Of course, they all got killed. So I'm asking myself the question, what would have happened if I hadn't had food poisoning? Would I have been on the plane? Would I have been killed? Or would I have prevented that accident from happening? These are the things that you mull over in your mind, and you wonder, are all these things that happened to you, like my missing the meeting, like my getting food poisoning, are all these things just chance, just accidents, just trivial things that happen with no rhyme or reason? Or is there something more going on? Is there something going on that controls your life? Because I'm talking to my kids, for example. I said, if all these things didn't happen, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be here. I might not be here. So you can't help but wonder in your own mind, what actually controls your course through life, and the little things that happen that cause you to change course. Everything that happens to you is a is a link. And Mahatma Gandhi had a saying, it's very true. The future depends on what we do in the present. I mean, it's a simple statement, but you stop and think of it, it's extremely true. It's what you do today is going to affect what's happening tomorrow. So I don't know whether all these things that I did, my visit to that little town on Easter Sunday where I got to meet this Polish lieutenant. Now another thing, I helped that Polish lieutenant get to America after the war.
Yeah.
He came to America, he married an American girl, he had a boy and a girl. He named his boy after the navigator, who was a friend, Donald. They called him Donald. He named the girl Denise after my oldest daughter. Denise became a school teacher. Donald went to Annapolis, became a naval officer, a submariner. Look at the new life that was created by that individual being in America. How did he get here? Well, I helped him come. And why did he? Well, I met him and we became friends. So all those little things are all links to bringing you to today. And you say, well, how did it all happen? Did it just happen? I mean, is it just chance? Is it just a trick of fate? Or is there something more important? Now, if you talk to people who believe that there's a higher power that controls everything, they will say there is such a thing as predestination. You didn't control that, somebody else did. Who? Well, a higher power. Then you have those. Now, I attended a course in the University of Wisconsin. And one of the things I participated in is what's called a T group. T like in Tom. T group. And what it is a psychiatrist that sits there and he runs the T group. And there's probably 6 to 10, 12 people sitting around. And all day long, all they do is talk without any script. And the professor encourages them to speak on any subject they want to speak. And he encourages the other people in the group to dispute them in their assumptions, in their thinking. In other words, he wants controversy.
Right.
That's what he wants. That's the T group. And apparently it was a very successful method of bringing about better relationships in work environments. He is, according to what I was told, he had been hired by certain foreign governments, like Pakistan, to come in and conduct tea groups for government employees as a means of correcting some relationship problems that they were having. And apparently there's valid reasons for believing that that's a good system. So we had this tea group at the University of Wisconsin. And as one of the things to bring up, I brought up this incident. And I also brought up another incident, which I will not talk about now, but it's something that happened later while I was a prisoner of war, that it's really, I can't explain it to this day, but
Yeah.
it was an occurrence that there's two sides. One side will say, what you experienced is this. You experienced something real. It wasn't a figment of your imagination. Then you have the group like the professor who was a psychiatrist. Nah, that's nothing. That's part of your emotional upset, and this is the reason that happened. Well, I'll get to that eventually when I talk to you about my time as a prisoner.
Right.
But
So how long before you found out that you were going to be sent to the European theater?
how long before I found out what?
You were being sent to the European theater.
I found that out. I'd say about a couple of months after I got transferred to the B-17 crew. And when we finished our training, they said, all right, you take off and you open your orders after you're airborne.
Oh.
We took off, opened the air. We got a brand new airplane, and we see in the orders that we're being assigned to the 301st Bomb Group, the 352nd Bomb Squadron, based in Italy. All right, so we take off from Florida. We stop at Trinidad, gas up, and fly to Belém, Brazil, gas up, fly to Fortaleza, Brazil, gas up, and then cross the Atlantic and make landfall in Western Africa. And we made landfall south of our destination for a reason. When you're flying a long distance like that over ocean, and you're trying to hit a small spot, you don't aim for the spot. If you aim for the spot and you miss it, you don't know which side of the damn thing you missed. So you aim for a spot south or north of where that is located, and then you move up the coast. And that way, you're pretty much assured of hitting your desired location. So about April 1944, we're on our way. We land in Italy, a brand new airplane. Oh, incidentally, on the way we had to spend a couple of extra days at a place called Rufisque, which was the base we landed at. There had been a crash, a B-24 had crashed, had been sabotaged, and 10 men were killed. So we had to act as pallbearers for this group of men. I remember going to the church service in the chapel, and a bunch of pine boxes were out there with the remains. And then the pine boxes were loaded in trucks, and we drove through the little native town of Rufisque to a cemetery near Dakar, the French military cemetery, where these poor bastards were buried. And then, but we then had our people sleep in the planes because we were afraid of more sabotage.
Yeah.
So ultimately we took off from Rufisque and across the Atlas Mountains and ended up at Marrakesh, North Africa. And after a day or so there, we flew down the coast, Tunis, to a point I think called Alawina. And from there we crossed the Mediterranean and landed in Italy, reported, delivered our airplane, and 2 days later they had us on a mission. Our first mission was a very frightening target that had only been bombed once before at tremendous loss. The name of the target was Ploesti. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
I have.
But we were going to bomb Ploesti. And I remember when they took the curtain off and saw the red ribbon going from our base to Ploesti, Romania, everybody was whistling, and oh boy. But we were anticipating a very rough time. But that was our first mission. But fortunately, we had the mission under our belt without experiencing any great difficulty. Yes, we had flak, but we saw no fighters. There were others in another group who did get attacked by a large number of fighters and lost quite a few planes. But our group was pretty lucky. We completed the target, bombing it, and came back home. That was our first mission. And I flew, I think, 10 more missions. And then I had this attack of food poisoning. And while I'm in the hospital with food poisoning, here comes another one of these incidents now. And you ask yourself, was this just a chance? Was it just a quirk of fate? Or was there something else? Well, I'm recovering from food poisoning, and who do I run into but a guy named Val Phillips, who was in flying school with me. And he was there visiting somebody, and he spots me and says, "Hey, what are you doing in the hospital?" I said, "I had some food poisoning." "Well, what are you doing in Italy?" I said, "I'm in a B-17 heavy bomb group." "What?" He says, "We need pilots. Why don't you come and join us and fly P-38s?" I said, "Well, I'd love to. I love that airplane. How am I going to do that?" He said, well, when you come out, why don't you write a letter and ask for a transfer? We do need pilots, and you've got good qualifications. I said, "Well, it's a long shot. It's a long shot, but I'll try it." So when I got out of the hospital, I sat down and I wrote this letter. And I spelled out all the time I had in 20s and airplanes, B-25s, 18-9s, and that I had checked out in the P-322, which was a P-38, and I made a pretty good case for it. Well, about a month went by, and all of a sudden I got the response. Approved. I had been approved to transfer from a bomber squadron to a fighter squadron. Now that doesn't happen very often. That is a very, very, very rare occasion. And you say to yourself, how the hell did that happen? How did it happen? But it did happen. I was overjoyed. For one thing, I was going to fly an airplane I loved. I mean, it's hard for a non-flyer to understand why a pilot falls in love with an airplane, for a certain airplane. But that's what had happened. I had become very much enamored with the P-38. I thought it was the most wonderful airplane in the world. So when I got the approval, I was overjoyed. I reported to the fighter squadron. Well, that same month, Mark, my B-17 group went on a mission and lost something like 11 airplanes. I was no longer in the squadron. Again, I'm asking myself this question. I wasn't there, so I didn't get knocked down. But what caused all that? I mean that's kind of scary, you know?
Yeah.
Kind of scary. And so here I am flying P-38s. Now what's next? What's next? Well, next is in a matter of a week or so, the whole squadron is sent on temporary duty to Corsica, which is off the coast of South France, to support the invasion of South France. So I'm out there with them, and I fly my first 5 missions in the P-38 in support of the invasion of South France. Didn't do anything real fancy or anything, but I remember what a wonderful, wonderful experience that was. I'm at 30,000 feet. What weather is beautiful. I look down and I see the bay and the southern part of France, and there's hundreds of ships anchored. Mm. And out in the distance I see a flight of medium bombers zapping in over the coastline, dropping their bombs. I can see the bombs hitting. I mean, I'm in the front row of an opera of war. I'm watching this, and I'm thinking to myself, how was I so lucky as to get into this kind of position? Here I am at 30,000 feet flying the most wonderful airplane in the world, and I'm watching the war. I'm watching the war unfold in front of my eyes. Well, it just so happens that nothing bad happened. I had a few minor problems, like one day we were at high altitude, and then we came down so fast that my windshield got frosted over to the point where I couldn't see through it. And I had to land the airplane by looking out the side of the plane and not the front. So what I did was come in on what they call the base leg so I could see where the runway was. I said, okay, that's where it is. I'm looking out of the side window. Then I make my turn and position the airplane so it's coming, I think, straight down towards that runway. But I can't see the runway, so I have to look out the side to judge how close I am to the ground, how close. And damn, I made a beautiful landing, no problem. I said, Jesus, that's amazing. I mean, I'm just tickled to death with getting away with that. Well, anyhow, after monkeying around there out of Corsica, finally the time came for them to ship the whole bunch of us back to Italy, which they did. They came back to Italy, and within 2 days after returning to Italy, our squadron is tasked to support a heavy bomber attack on an oil target in Austria. And I'm on the mission. My job, my assignment is to fly the wing position with the group commander. What time is it?
10 to 6.
Huh?
10 to 6.
Okay.
No,
This is a good place to
It's 3.
stop.
Oh,
But